What-ifs are part and parcel of the movie-making process. Drafts are revised, writers, directors, and actors all come and go, and entire projects can fall to the wayside due to a mixture of the above, or to a myriad of other factors like scheduling conflicts, or budget issues, or a giant asteroid coming and wiping everything out of existence. Well, anyway, it's difficult to say whether or not an unrealized project would have bettered a disappointing release. Filmmaking is a fluid process and projects change all the time. But in premise alone, it's easier to assess what would or would not have been more compelling. So join me as we mourn the films that could have been. I'm Ewan, this is What Culture, and here are 8 movies where the worst version got made. Number 8. Lethal Weapon 4. One of the most fascinating parts of Lethal Weapon as a series to me is the oscillating tonal battles that took place behind the scenes. The first film, written by Shane Black with some rewrites by Jeffrey Boehm, is this gritty post-Vietnam action film that tackles PTSD and the legacies of the conflict, while the second is a fun, slightly goofball adventure that sees Riggs and Murtaugh take on some apartheid gangsters, while Joe Pesci tags along with the challenge of saying, okay, more times than any other actor in a single film. Lethal Weapon 2 was almost very different though. Black's script was tossed aside in favor of a rewrite from Boehm, which toned down the darkness and aborted an ending where Riggs would have died. Boehm returned for the decidedly less precise Lethal Weapon 3, retaining the previous film's antics, but with a clumsy focus on gun crime. Lethal Weapon 4 course corrects ever so slightly, but it's not the gritty original nor the high-octane funfest that is the first sequel. This is because Jeffrey Boehm wasn't responsible for the Lethal Weapon 4 shooting script. Boehm had developed a screenplay, one that would have, ironically, tapped into the dark roots of the Shane Black original by having Riggs and Murtaugh go up against neo-Nazi terrorists. But it was set aside by the studio, who ostensibly wanted Lethal Weapon 4 to focus on the triads. Boehm's script appeals way more on premise and reputation than what we eventually got, even if Lethal Weapon 4 mostly succeeds as a franchise send-off. Mostly. Number 7. Ant-Man. If any film is more emblematic of the manufactured nature of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then it has to be Ant-Man. Originally envisioned as a fun heist caper helmed by the Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy's Edgar Wright all the way back in 2003, Ant-Man unfortunately found itself sucked up into the Marvel Studios apparatus, and thus had to conform to the rigid confines of the MCU. Wright and screenwriting partner Joe Cornish went through several drafts over the course of Ant-Man's long-gestating production, and were attached to the project as late as 2014 when the casting process was in full swing. However, a few months later, Wright and Marvel ended up parting companies over creative differences, with the former stating in an interview with EW that he, quote, didn't think Marvel wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie. Some of the DNA of Wright and Cornish's script remains in the finished version of Ant-Man helmed by Peyton Reed, and while that version is entertaining, the prospect of seeing Wright's full vision away from the architecture of the MCU is way more appealing. Number 6. The Hobbit. Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy was a far cry away from the excellence of The Lord of the Rings, mainly as a result of stretching out a concise one-movie adventure into a bloated 3-parter shot almost entirely on blue screen. While the majesty of Jackson's previous foray into Middle-earth occasionally bubbles up to the surface, The Hobbit Parts 1, 2, and 3 are sludgy and overwrought adventures with few redeeming qualities. This makes the fact that Guillermo del Toro was initially attached to direct The Hobbit even more frustrating. The Pan's Labyrinth and Shape of Water director boarded the project in 2008, and collaborated with Jackson in creating the screenplays for a then 2-picture effort. While still in tune with Jackson's vision of Middle-earth, Del Toro's Hobbit would have differed in key respects, most notably in the effects department, which would have reportedly seen the director replicate animatronic techniques seen in his version of Hellboy. While production deadlines almost certainly proved to be the undoing of the Hobbit movies, Del Toro's 2-part effort sounds like it would have stood alongside the original Lord of the Rings trilogy as its own distinct creature, rather than as a sluggish, belabored trilogy. Number 5. The Amazing Spider-Man. The winding path that took us to The Amazing Spider-Man's release in 2012 epitomizes the worst trends of the comic book movie genre, enacted by the studio with by far the most weird, ill-thought-out superhero schemes in the business. Yep, give it up for Sony, folks, the company that swapped out Sam Raimi's Spider-Man to create a contrived cinematic universe populated entirely by B-tier Spidey villains, led by an incarnation of the Wallcrawler whose most memorable trait was being way too cool to actually be Peter Parker. Adding insult to injury, though, is that we could have had Spider-Man 4 instead of The Amazing Spider-Man, a fourth film from Sam Raimi that was set to include the Lizard, Black Cat, and a bigger role for Bruce Campbell, the main draw of the franchise to begin with, as we all know. Now, for his part, Raimi has spoken out regarding his dissatisfaction with getting Spider-Man 4 off the ground, and it was him who pulled the plug on the project down to frustrations with the script. Even so, a less than stellar work from Raimi would have still had twice the amount of personality, pathos, and investment than what was seen with The Amazing Spider-Man. Number 4. Star Wars Episode 9: The Rise of Skywalker. J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio's story for Star Wars Episode 9: The Rise of Skywalker is a perfect lesson in how not to make a sequel, from its infuriating attempts at relitigating Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi to its cheap shots at invoking nostalgia for the original Star Wars trilogy. It is a bad film. Easily the worst Star Wars entry, and no, I will not hear a bad word about The Phantom Menace. That movie is good, and one that could have easily been less bad had Lucasfilm committed to the story being developed by the director Abrams replaced, Colin Trevorrow. Trevorrow, who is most famous for his work on the admittedly bad Jurassic World movies, was originally unveiled as the director of Episode 9 in 2015. However, Trevorrow was booted off the project in 2017 as a result of creative differences, with Abrams replacing him as director and Chris Terrio also stepping in to draft a new screenplay, which included the now infamous, somehow Palpatine returns zinger in the opening 10 minutes, and such Troy McClure-styled hits like, "Help, I'm Rey Palpatine," and "Oh no, Chewie's dead. Oh no, he's now alive." Trevorrow's script, titled Duel of the Fates, was leaked shortly after the release of The Rise of Skywalker in 2019. While bizarre in some respects, admittedly, Duel of the Fates swings for the fences where Skywalker merely piddles sadly in the corner. It drew upon the themes of Episode 8, committing to Kylo Ren as a villain haunted by the ghost of Luke, continuing Rey's journey as a Jedi with her own double-bladed lightsaber, and even having Finn and Rose in a sort of Les Mis-style uprising on Coruscant, which had fallen under Imperial control. It's impossible to say whether or not Trevorrow would have nailed the landing, but in concept alone, Duel of the Fates is way more fascinating, ambitious, and ultimately more cohesive than The Rise of Skywalker. Number 3. The Black Dahlia. Brian De Palma and James Ellroy should have been a match made in heaven. De Palma, one of the greatest filmmakers of his generation, had developed a reputation for fusing lust and violence in a number of erotic and psychological thrillers, while Blowout, released in 1981, is itself a neo-noir classic. Ellroy, whose LA quartet had masterfully grappled with the socio-political landscape of post-war Los Angeles and had touched on similar subject matter in the process, should have been the perfect launching pad for De Palma to make a late-career marvel. 2006's The Black Dahlia, adapted from the first of Ellroy's quartet, was anything but. Poorly cast and sadly muddily shot, Josh Friedman's script failed to condense Ellroy's weighty source into a 2-hour runtime, excising large swaths of the novel and losing much of its horror and delicious noir tragedy in the process. While Curtis Hanson and Brian Helgeland had achieved wicked results with 1997's LA Confidential, the third entry in the LA Quartet, it's kind of miraculous that they managed to do just that. Dahlia, which is more of a slow burn, had so many disparate moving parts that any film adaptation was always going to struggle. Number 2. Batman Forever. Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever offered a fun, neon-drenched take on Gotham City, but as much as I myself may have a soft spot for it, Val Kilmer's Bruce Wayne and Jim Carrey's endlessly quotable take on the Riddler, Burton had begun work on a third Batman film following the release of Batman Returns in 1992, with Michael Keaton once again set to reprise the role of the Caped Crusader. However, the controversy surrounding Returns' dark content mixed with its diminishing box office returns compelled Warner Bros. To take the series in a lighter direction, which saw Burton and Keaton depart the project and Schumacher and Kilmer step in. It's unclear what direction Burton would have taken the series, given his departure happened so early into Batman Forever's production, but it wouldn't have been a surprise to see the return of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. As things stand, Schumacher's Batman Forever is a fine but flawed comic book movie. However, given the cuts made to the film, the brilliance of Burton's previous 2 installments, and the fact that Warner Bros. Considered Sam Raimi and John McTiernan for the director's chair as well, it's easy to see how much stronger it could have been. And number 1, Alien vs. Predator. Alien vs. Predator has to go down as one of the greatest bag fumblings in movie history. While the film returned a significant sum at the box office, it squandered the easiest home run premise ever in pitting 2 of sci-fi's most iconic creatures against each other. Unfortunately, neither Alien vs. Predator nor its sequel, Alien vs. Predator Requiem, were able to deliver. While the latter gets some gnarly bonus points for being so thoroughly nasty in its approach to the material, both films fail to do justice to the comic book meetings between the 2 franchises, taking place in the 21st century rather than in the more interesting setting of the far future. Alien is simply way less compelling as a concept when given a contemporary setting, and the idea of pitting the Predator against the Xenos and soldiers with colonial marine-style technology would have made for a refreshing change of pace. Tragically, this is the exact kind of AVP movie that Hellboy screenwriter Peter Briggs pitched to Fox back in 1991. Briggs' script, The Hunt, Alien vs. Predator, took significant inspiration from the Dark Horse comics and was set in the future. It's gone down as one of the best scripts that was never filmed, and reading breakdowns, it's easy to see why. And those were 8 movies where the worst version got made. Which cancelled project have you been mourning for the last however many years? Let's share our tears down in the comments below, and while you're down there, if you could drop us a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe if you want more, well, that would be swell too. Either way, I've been Ewan, this has been WhatCulture, and I will hopefully see you next time.